In this session, we want to take a look at the Johannine Literature. We want to, first of all, mention what is the Johannine Literature. We want to look at a couple of textual concerns that are especially important in this literature. We want to look at underlying conflicts that inform the Johannine Literature, and finally take a look at an illustrative passage. The Johannine Literature are the books in the New Testament that bear the name of John, as well as we'll see, Revelation. So they are, of course, the Gospel of John, 1 John, 2nd and 3rd John, and sometimes Revelation. The textual concerns that I wanted to mention from the Johannine Literature, first of all, is a much beloved passage, but sad to say, it's not original. I'm talking about John chapter 7, verses 53 to chapter 8, verse 11. This is the story of the woman caught in adultery, brought to Jesus, accused in front of him, and threatened with stoning. Jesus stoops down, writes on the ground with his finger, and the accusers disappear. It's a very nice story, much beloved and often remembered and told. The problem with this story is that it didn't appear in the Gospel of John until centuries later after John was written. It's not part of the Gospel of John, not the Gospel as it was originally written. That doesn't mean, of course, that it didn't happen. It could have happened. It could have been told and retold throughout those intervening centuries. It just doesn't happen to be part of the original Gospel of John. The second one I want to mention is one that's not so much beloved, but really theologically significant. Even we can say theologically convenient. It's the one in 1 John chapter 5, verses 7 and 8 that talk about, it's the clearest, or I should say it was, the clearest statement of the Trinity that we had in the New Testament. But again, it's not part of the original. We talked earlier about textual criticism, or I should say in another video we talked about that, how to analyze what wording is correct. Those words, sad to say, the ones that talked about the Trinity, they're not part of what was originally written in the New Testament. So we have those two textual concerns that are repeated so often, especially the one that we love so much to tell. But as I say, they're not part of the original text. There are, it seems, some underlying conflicts that inform the Johannine Literature. That is to say, they're not directly addressing problems, but they're addressing them not by mentioning the problem itself, but somehow talking against that or about that problem. It's a little bit dangerous to try to reconstruct the problem when it's not stated clearly in the text. We call that arguing from science, arguing from silence. Because the text is silent on that point. But when we look at the historical situation and try to really understand what's going on, we can make some progress even when the text doesn't tell us specifically. So there are two things that have been suggested as informing what is it that the writers are trying to accomplish. The first one is arguing against Gnosticism. Gnosticism is a type of Christianity, should we say a cult of early Christianity, whereby it was based on secret knowledge. That's the word Gnosticism, comes from the Greek word knowledge. And so the idea was, if you got the right piece of knowledge, you could be saved. So the idea was something like this. The world started perfectly spiritual, no physicality at all. And I shouldn't say the world, I should say reality started that way. God was that way. And then in the Gnostic way of thinking, there were emanations, divine emanations. It's something like a fountain that spills over from this receptacle of pure spirit, spilled out, and then it spilled out again and spilled out again. And each time it spilled out, it became a little less spiritual and a little more physical. So spirit was bad, spirit was good, and flesh was bad. But if you were of the Gnostic type, even though you're flesh and blood, inside you is a spark of divine character. And what you needed is the right knowledge to work your way back up those emanations to God. And so Jesus, in the Christian version of Gnosticism, Jesus was the mediator, shall we say, that would give you the knowledge to get you back to where you belonged. If you didn't have that divine spark in you, you couldn't recognize the knowledge and you couldn't make your way back up. That's one idea that some people think is underlying that the Johannine literature is arguing against. Another one we can call ethnic Christianity. This is coming really from a scholar whose name was F.C. Bauer, a little over 150 years ago. A very influential scholar, even to this day in some respects. And his idea was that history moves in predictable ways. An idea informs the age, and then that idea is somehow opposed, and then those two ideas work together to produce a synthesis. And his grand scheme of things was that the original idea was Jewish Christianity, and symbolized by Peter. And that was opposed by Gentile Christianity, symbolized by Paul. And those two ideas got combined up into the Johannine literature. And so he talked about it as law for Jewish Christianity, grace for Pauline Christianity, and the law of love for Johannine Christianity. That's a nice way of organizing things. I think we really can't follow him on all of that, but it is helpful to think about law of love as characterizing the Johannine literature. I want to mention, finally, the illustrative passage. I want to take us to John chapter 4 to help us understand that. John chapter 4 is the story of the woman at the well. The way that story is told in our churches these days, I think really does violence to the text. It doesn't really correctly understand what's going on there. The way that I hear it's told too often is that the woman at the well is a sinful, terrible, immoral person trying to justify herself before Jesus, who doesn't let her get away with her sin. I think that's a wrong way of understanding what's happening with the woman at the well. I think so for at least three reasons. First of all, we can talk about intertextuality. I mentioned that in another video, about the connection between the Old Testament and the New Testament. When we come to the woman at the well, it's very interesting that we're told that Jesus sat at Jacob's well. Why are we told that it's Jacob's well? One of the reasons is that it connects us up with the Old Testament stories of the patriarchs. Remember, they went to wells. What well did they go to? Well, remember the story of the patriarchs. when they went to a well, or their representative went to a well, why? To find a wife. Now, I'm not suggesting, don't misunderstand me, I'm not suggesting Jesus was looking for a wife, but rather to say, when you went to a well in the Old Testament patriarchal period, as told in the Old Testament, you found there a woman of worth. Not a sinful, terrible, no good, very bad woman, but a woman of worth. That suggests to us right away that we should understand this woman not as a terrible person, but as someone who would be a conversation partner, a worthy conversation partner with Jesus. Secondly, we understand in the Gospel of John that there's a symbol or a symbolic world. And in that symbolic world, light is good and darkness is bad. Now, think about the context of John chapter 4. What comes immediately before? Of course, John 3:16, we know that one. But remember, what's John 3:16 part of? It's part of Jesus' conversation with Nicodemus. Aha. What about Nicodemus? When did Nicodemus come to Jesus? At night. And what kind of person was Nicodemus? He was a guy that just did not understand what Jesus was trying to do. Remember, Jesus said, "You're a teacher of Israel and you don't get it?" He just had trouble understanding how Nicodemus couldn't understand it. And he came at night. But the woman at the well, it was noon, the brightest time of the day. The woman at the well is deliberately contrasted with Nicodemus. Nicodemus, nighttime, darkness, doesn't get it. But the woman at the well, right in the middle of the day, so perceptive, so understanding, so ready to understand that this is the Messiah. I should mention that Nicodemus does get it at the end of John. But at this point, there's a strong contrast between Nicodemus and the woman at the well. Finally, from a sociological perspective, we're told that she had had 5 husbands. What kind of woman has 5 husbands? First of all, notice that they were husbands. When we characterize her as a prostitute or a loose woman, why would such a woman have husbands? 5 husbands. No, that's not the right way of understanding what was happening with her. She was a person that was respected by men, so much so that they were willing to take a risk at marrying someone who had been married before. Very unusual in that time. Not only that, it seems most likely that from a sociological perspective, the reason that she was no longer married to husband number 1 was because she was barren, unable to have children. So she was a marginalized woman. Not marginalized because of her sin, but because of her barrenness. So we see this woman is many times marginalized. She's marginalized, first of all, because she's a woman. She's marginalized, secondly, because she's a Samaritan, not a Jew. She's marginalized yet again because she is barren. And that meant that some people thought something was wrong with her. But now she's marginalized again when we misread this story and make her the bad person instead of the person that Jesus saw her to be, an insightful woman who understands religious things. The Johannine literature has enduring significance for us. It's comprised of so many beloved texts that come from the community, if not the very person, of the beloved disciple. It's important to recognize that there's Old Testament imagery that is being used in the Gospel of John to convey the theological importance of Christ. And we see the love of Christ so clearly portrayed in the Johannine literature.